Hello, good afternoon, good morning. For some of you, it may even be good evening. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, where each week, each Monday, I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we've heard about throughout the entire data center ecosystem, including operators like co-location, wholesale, hyperscale, edge and modular, like technology and facilities companies, construction and real estate companies, and even outsourced sales and marketing companies. And regardless of what your role is on a go-to-market team, perhaps you're in sales or marketing or customer success, account management, product-related role, maybe a channel partnerships role, maybe a consulting professional services type of role, or an executive sponsor type of function. But either way, if you are in a client-facing role in and around the data center industry, and you are looking to improve how your company does, how your team does, how you do in your career, you are for sure in the right place. This week, I'm going to be tackling a handful of questions that are especially relevant to hyperscale data center operators, telecommunications companies that work in and around the data center ecosystem, companies that are doing things with renewable energy and microgrids. We'll take a quick break from our sponsor. When we come back, we'll talk about network solution providers specifically involved with fiber optics and that particular facet of telecommunications. We'll talk about co-location providers, and then we'll come down the home stretch this week with some discussion about companies that are specializing in power for digital infrastructure, for data centers, for mission critical facilities. Just a quick heads up, if you are just finding out about this live stream and you want to make sure that you're notified about upcoming events like this and similar kinds of resources, make sure that you get our data center sales and marketing email newsletter delivered to your email inbox. That comes out every Sunday. You can sign up, you can subscribe for that directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question. First up is, how do we create a go-to-market strategy for a hyperscale data center operator? How do we create go-to-market strategy for a data center operator focused on hyperscale? That's a fantastic question, and it's one that's very near and dear to me because we've just simply been having so many conversations lately with companies that are either looking to get new hyperscale projects off the ground or grow or expand. Just in the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, recorded a podcast interview with a marketing executive with a well-known global hyperscale company, recorded another podcast that's actually going to be coming live pretty soon, I think in the next week or two, with operations executive from one of the big 3 hyperscalers. And the big 3 are typically considered Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, and Amazon Web Services, AWS. Also had 2 people reach out last week with some brand new projects, I think one in APAC and one in Latin America, specifically to hyperscale, and had a consultation back in June with a mid-level sales director at one of the big 3 cloud companies, talking about content and thought leadership, sales enablement, and channel partner enablement, and what their team, what their organization should be focused on going forward to remain competitive. So hyperscale is and what's really interesting though is, even though having a lot of these conversations with hyperscale, I've also spoke to a couple of people that are not just working on edge. Edge by definition is kind of like the opposite of hyperscale, right? Is really, really small and as close to the end user point for eliminating latency as possible. But there's also another camp, there's also another school of thought now that hyperscale has gotten too big. And with too big, it's too much of a central single point of failure, but it also has some downsides when it comes to sustainability. Because when you look at one of the bigger use cases around hyperscale and sustainability has to do with heat reuse. And in order for heat reuse to be effective, the data center needs to be located where there are end users, where there's residential, where there's commercial facilities that can benefit from having that heat reuse. So if a hyperscale data center is located in the middle of nowhere and there's no neighbors adjacent to that who can benefit from heat reuse, well, one of the big heat reuse cases goes out the window. That's also been a really interesting topic that's come up multiple times in the podcast in recent weeks, and you'll be seeing in some upcoming episodes. And what I'm talking about here is the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and you can make sure that you learn about upcoming episodes by subscribing to our newsletter or follow or subscribe anywhere else you normally would consume podcast episodes, like on our LinkedIn company page, our YouTube channel, and of course all the popular podcast aggregators like Apple, Spotify, Amazon. So anyway, how do we create a go-to-market strategy for a hyperscale data center operator? To put this in context, the first thing is there is significant life way beyond the big three hyperscalers when it comes to hyperscale data centers. In other words, there are significant multi-billion dollar and 8-figure, 9-figure businesses and beyond in and around hyperscale, beyond just Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. Of course, those big three tend to build their own facilities, but they also take space in other hyperscale and other co-location, and in some cases in wholesale facilities, to get closer to users, depending on the particular business need in that region or for specialized use cases. But at the end of the day, before you can figure out what the go-to-market strategy looks like, you need to be really dialed into where your company does best with your hyperscale solutions. And for huge companies, the first place we'd look for these clues is on your case studies or your solutions page. And we look for what kinds of industries, what kinds of locations, what size companies that you've historically done best at. Like we're building any kind of go-to-market strategy playbook. We first want to look at where we can win most often, where our clients are most successful, where they have the amazing experience with your customer success, with your account management teams, and they expand their usage over time. You're able to cross-sell complementary related services. They're a very strong source of positive digital word of mouth that helps to get your growth flywheel spinning even faster. So once we know what your best clients, what your best hyperscale clients have in common, then we can go about defining your ideal client profile. So we know the region that you want to target, or regions that you want, geographic regions that you want to target potentially, the company sizes that make the most sense. Are you good with mid-market clients? Are you really good with selling hyperscale to these needle in a haystack SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses that have a need for hyperscale? Or are you going to primarily just focus on Fortune 1000 kind of clients that are looking for hyperscale? And then there's industry-specific, business model-specific qualifications that may come up when you are looking at what goes in your ICP, your ideal client profile. And this is especially relevant in areas where you're facing regulation. In other words, there's data center specific regulations that are unique to the European Union. There's ones that are unique to the United States. There's ones that are unique to special regions within each of those. And there's certainly regulations that come up that have to do with certain industries, such as in financial services, healthcare, government, e-commerce. There's a bunch of different areas, a bunch of different capabilities that come up depending on the geographic region that you're targeting and the nature of your client's business. So once you have that documented, you'll have an idea of what your ideal client profile looks like. And from there, you can go out building your target account list. And it could be, depending on how tightly clustered together, how tightly defined your ideal client profile is, you may need more than one target account list. You may need more than one team going after these monster size accounts, these 800-pound gorilla accounts. Again, it may be a little counterintuitive, but there can sometimes be smaller startup-y kind of companies that have a need for hyperscale. You don't necessarily need to be a 10,000 plus employee company to be a buyer of hyperscale, but it tends to correlate a little more than you would think. But again, all of this comes down to, where has your company won the best? Where have you done the best? Where have you had the best track record? Where are your clients happiest? Where are your clients most successful? Where have you hit and consistently maintained product market fit and go to market fits? You know exactly what your unit economics are. You know when you pour more capital into your growth engine, you know it continues to be productive. So you have your ideal client profile. You build out your target account list, which could be anywhere from a few dozen, usually a few hundred, sometimes a few thousand accounts that you want to build relationships with because they look like they could be your great future hyperscale clients. And then within those accounts, what are the kinds of people that you want to build relationships with? Are they CTOs? Are they small enough that you need to build a relationship with a CEO? I was actually listening to someone talking about Microsoft's Azure business and how so many of these deals are so huge now that it's not the CTO anymore. That's the decision maker. It's the CEO and finance, the CFOs and the boards, because these are such huge decisions that are being made. So you need to understand at the size of account you're going after, what are the buyer personas that you need to be educating and building trust with, that you need to build relationships with. And the most important kind of buyer persona, just to make sure we're on the same page, a buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an actual client that you want to do business with based on actual research and some select educated speculation. And when you're building and documenting, when you're researching and documenting these buyer personas, be super careful to make sure that you don't over-index on internal feedback. What does that mean? All too often, when people are building out buyer personas, they take that input from internal stakeholders. Like if you have a longtime sales director or marketing executive, and they're certain that they have all the answers because they've been in the industry a long time, it can be really dangerous to base your buyer personas purely based on internal input. So what I would caution you is, as you're doing the research and looking at the commonalities and building and documenting these buyer personas, internal input, meaning with your internal stakeholders, should be maybe 20% of the input. The other 80% needs to come from actual conversations, video interviews, surveys, studying how they talk, how they describe themselves on search and social, the kind of content they share, their watering holes where they hang out online and offline. Most of that needs to come from external research. And when you have the consensus on that, sometimes people tend to lump these in together with job titles. The reality, though, is the buyer personas have more to do with behaviors than pure demographics. So when you start to see consistencies in the kind of goals that a buyer persona needs to achieve to do well in their job, to keep their job, to potentially earn a promotion, to potentially earn a bonus, the commonalities among their goals tell you that you're probably finding a group that can be aggregated together into a single buyer persona. And the flip side of that, among their biggest challenges, among their biggest stressors, what's driving them nuts, what's causing them to miss time away from their friends, family, and loved one, what's ruining their vacations. When you see commonalities among those things, again, this can cross job titles and would tell you that it may be a single persona rather than multiple buyer personas. But especially on enterprise accounts, you're almost certainly going to have a segmentation strategy based on who they are and where they are in the journey. So based the who they are, your most important buyer persona you'll call your primary buyer persona. Your second most important buyer persona you call your secondary buyer persona. If there's a third buyer persona that you're actively going to target for educating and building trust with, that would be a tertiary buyer persona. And each one of these personas is going to need its own content and event strategy if you really want to knock it out of the park, especially if there's a lot of economic value associated with each of these groups of potential buyers. So let's say, for example, as a hyperscaler, you determine that it's CEOs of like health sciences companies and biotechnology companies or something like that that you're targeting. So you go and you do your research, you figure out the common goals and challenges that the CEOs of health science and biotech companies would have in common. And then from those goals and challenges, that will inform what your content and event strategy needs to look like. And you also need to figure out a way to be with them throughout the full buyer's journey. We now live in a world where people have become incredibly allergic to spending time with sales professionals. It used to be 10 years ago that most prospects, especially in that kind of situation, would meet with someone from your sales team when they were about halfway through the buyer's journey. At the prevailing time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner, did some research with Salesforce and SiriusDecisions, and they found at the time, about 10 years ago, 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before vendor contact, before sales contact. Add 10 years of digital transformation to that, add 2 years of most of the world working from home in the early 2020s, and we're now in a place where 83% of a typical journey is over before sales contact. Nearly all of the journey is over before you get to meet a prospect. And wow, does that change the nature of what you need to be doing to be competitive with your go-to-market strategy? So in order to be relevant, your sales team, your marketing team, your account managers, your product managers, your channel managers can no longer show up as vendor people. They no longer can show up as a transaction-focused salesperson, a transaction-focused account manager. They now need to arrive in front of prospects and clients way earlier on in the buyer's journey and show up as a teacher, a trusted advisor, a consultant, a subject matter expert, and maybe even elevating all the way up to a thought leader. So this is a really important repositioning exercise that most of your client-facing team needs to go through to stay relevant to the way that people research and compare and make purchase decisions when it comes to anything and everything having to do with hyperscale. So this dictates the nature of what you do with your blogging strategy, your video strategy, your podcast strategy, your webinar strategy, how you nurture your leads, and even your offline events, how you're going to do educational offline events. All too often by default, when I bring up event marketing or field marketing in and around the data center industry, people default to thinking of these huge conferences and even the large regional roadshow conferences. The reality, though, is you are almost certainly sharing the spotlight with dozens of other companies that are competing for attention at that particular event. If you really want to drive deep education building and deep trust building in lieu of or in addition to those kinds of mega conferences, I'd encourage you to be hosting your own events. Obviously, logistically, cost-wise and everything, streaming events and webinars have a much lower entry point than doing your own physical events offline. But depending on the nature of how closely clustered together your client base may be, if your clients are located relatively close proximity to where you have facilities, and your facilities have a nice classroom or a big conference room or something, it's shockingly affordable for anyone and everyone that is watching this live stream to put together an amazing breakfast seminar series or lunch and learn series where you invite a few dozen prospects and clients together monthly, quarterly, what have you, and you supply your own internal speakers to talk about topics that you know are top of mind for that particular buyer persona. How do you know what's top of mind? What's going to get them excited enough about wanting to come have bagels, coffee, and learn with you and network with peers for an hour on a Wednesday morning? Well, because we're not going to guess. We're going to use the buyer persona research to dictate our content and our event strategy. So if you think you need a massive budget to pull off that kind of strategy, again, if you have your own facility and you have your own training room or classroom or conference room in your facilities and you're targeting in the local area, and all you're really talking about doing is bringing in some catering for breakfast or lunch or something, or a cocktail party in the evening or something, you'd be shocked at how effective these kinds of grassroots efforts can be when you're focusing on one particular buyer persona at one particular stage of the buyer's journey, and you have your goals in mind of what you're looking to achieve from that kind of event. So we could do a whole hour-long session. We could do a whole webinar on building go-to-market strategy for hyperscale data centers. But I hope I've given you a good preview into some of the big considerations that I'd be thinking about if you're tasked with thinking about putting together, optimizing, recalibrating, repositioning your hyperscale go-to-market strategy to be relevant to the way that modern buyers research, compare options, and evaluate pricing when it comes to making major considered hyperscale purchase decisions. It's a very different buyer than you would have had 10 years ago. Sure, if you're selling to the extreme 5 or 10% that's over 75 years old and isn't quite as addicted to these as millennials and Gen Z and even Gen X to a certain degree, yeah, you may want to do things a little bit more the way you used to do it 10 years ago. But for nearly everyone else, if you're selling to a buyer, a stakeholder, a committee that is doing tons of research on search and social and posing questions on Discords and Slacks and texting their friends and asking questions on LinkedIn and watching webinars and review sites and podcasts, which largely describes all of us. Again, your buyer personas will validate this. It's super important that you show up as a subject matter expert, a teacher, a trusted advisor, and a consultant. That's the only way that you're going to get invited in early and often to their side of the table as a trusted advisor. Next question. How can a multi-channel telecommunications consultancy refine its ideal client profile? How does a multi-channel telecommunications consultancy refine its ideal client profile? That's a fantastic question. So, consulting firm in and around telecommunications, and they're concerned that their ideal client profile isn't cutting it anymore. And the way that they're going to find that it isn't cutting it anymore is it's probably a combination of financial metrics around revenue and profitability, maybe average sales cycle length, margin, and it may be a combination of customer satisfaction, net promoter score type of metrics as well. And it may be that the ideal client profile was perfect for the last 3, 4, 5 years. And then all of a sudden, there's something new that's coming in the marketplace from a competitive standpoint, and your company needs to adjust and pivot and reinvent itself to stay relevant. So refining, updating, rebranding, all of that when it comes to your ideal client profile is really where do you think, based on your company's current roadmap and short-term future roadmap, where do you believe you're going to be most successful? Where historically have you done well, and with the product and services investments that you're currently making to be able to deliver services in the coming months and in the next few years, where do you believe you're going to be most successful? What is your target that you're going after? Because an ideal client profile usually starts by defining a geographic factor. Are you able to sell these telecommunications consulting services globally? Are they relevant to a particular region like North America or EMEA or APAC or something like that? There perhaps a cluster of countries that you're going to target. Like maybe, for example, you're targeting France, Italy, and Spain or something like that. Or maybe you're targeting the US, Canada, and Mexico or something. Or maybe you're targeting most countries in South America, but not Brazil for whatever reason, maybe because of language differences. But either way, first get your mind around what your addressable market, your total addressable market or TAM is going to be based on where you believe you can be most successful with your clients in the coming months and in the coming years. Once you have the geographic factors under control, I would next lean into company size, where you believe you can be most successful. Historically, where have you had the most success with your telecommunications consulting services? Has it been with small and medium-sized businesses? Has it been with mid-market? Has it been with enterprise? Now, bear in mind that in the same way, you really need to take your geographic factors and spend some time in LinkedIn or LinkedIn Sales Navigator and make sure that you're tight enough around your definitions as LinkedIn is. I would do the same thing with your company size bands. In other words, there are quite a few different opinions as to where the top of SMB, small and medium-sized business, stops and where mid-market starts. And there's quite a few different opinions too on where the top of mid-market stops and where enterprise truly starts. So of course, in the data center industry, people talk about square footage meters, as well as the power capacity, the megawatts potentially gigawatts down the road, or if we're going back in time a little bit, kilowatts. Sure, the space, the physical space and the power definitely makes a difference, but you're not going to be able to target in LinkedIn by client megawatt requirements or square footage requirements. You're going to be targeting based on a company size. So sure, you can add some of those additional factors if it's relevant to your particular business model. In the case of telecommunications, it probably isn't. It's probably focused more on telecommunication specific qualifiers as opposed to co-location or wholesale data center type of qualifiers. But maybe it has to do with something that you're looking for with interconnections. Maybe it has to do with something that has to do with the number of carriers that are in their meet me room, or their approach to carrier neutrality, or something along those lines. But either way, your ICP should have a geographic component. It should have a company size component. There's probably some business model or industry factors that are especially relevant. And another thing that you're probably, especially when you're selling professional services like consulting, is your roadmap is going to be very heavily dependent on your internal talents. Because of course you're going to productize to a certain degree what you're doing, and you're going to develop your SOPs, your processes to be able to deliver the same consistent results all the time. But at the end of the day, you can only deliver consulting services as well as your internal talent allows you to do so. So this may be more dynamic over time than you may have been thinking initially because of the nature of that factor as well. But once you've defined the geography, the company size, the nature of the business models, the nature of the industries that you're targeting, and recognize that a lot of the success factors will depend on your talent attraction and talent retention, then it's a matter of understanding that in today's journey, most of your buyers are preferring a self-propelled research and decision-making process where they'll meet with someone from your sales team, but they're going to be very, very deep into the journey before they do so. Gartner says typically the journey will be about 83% over before any vendor contact. So in order for you to get in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that you and your team are seen as the go-to experts when it comes to multi-channel telecommunications, that thought leadership, the approach to consulting, subject matter expertise, teaching, trusted advisor is incredibly important. So once you have the ICP under control, define your buyer personas, figure out what your primary and secondary buyer persona's biggest goals and challenges are, and really invest aggressively in creating amazingly helpful, remarkable content and events experiences that help your most important buyer personas do well in their jobs, do well in their careers, advance their careers, because you've seen the pattern recognition of what they need to do to be successful, not just at step 1, 2, 3, because you know what it takes for them to get through the whole journey, the whole life cycle. A typical buyer's journey now may have as many as 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decisions. So if you want to be successful, you can't just show up every once in a while in awareness and consideration and keep your fingers crossed and hope and pray that you're going to be on the short list. You need more than that. There's 28 touch points. So the better job you can do with recognizing that reality and showing up in as many of those 28 touch points throughout the full buyer's journey, the better off you're going to be. So when you do that right, you're nearly guaranteed to be on the short list. When you do that at an elite world-class level, in certain situations, you may do such a phenomenal job, and your best prospects, your clients, may be spending so much time with your subject matter experts and thought leaders that you may have neutralized all or nearly all of the competitive factors. So by the time they're in market, so that by the time they're at the decision stage, it's a super natural conversation because they're using your educational content resources to define their whole methodology, every way, shape, or form that they evaluate the competitive options that are in front of them. And you'll know this is working because you go meet a prospect for the first time and they are literally quoting your content. They're quoting your research report. They're quoting things they learned at your webinar as if they went and they took a certificate program at an Ivy League business school or something like that. So when you're able to, or as if you're one of the big research firms that are commanding tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands a year, or your local currency equivalent for that kind of research. When you have that kind of impact on prospects, that's when all the good stuff starts to happen. If you bury your head in the sand and pretend like this doesn't exist and say that our prospects are different, they don't care about things like smartphones and comparison review websites, and they would never watch a YouTube video or listen to a podcast or go to a webinar. They buy the old-fashioned way. They're going to use their fax modem. They're going to use their dial-up. They're going to look you up in the phone book. They're going to read the newspaper in the driveway. They're going to wait until the next issue of the trade publication comes with their annual forecast guide. All of these things that we now know, unfortunately, belong in the museum of how people used to research and make considered IT purchase decisions. So if you want to operate in today's reality, those are the things to be thinking about when it comes to refining your ideal client profile, refining your ICP in and around multi-channel telecommunication consulting services. Next question up is, how can a microgrid and renewable energy provider for data centers find new clients to talk to? How does a microgrid and renewable energy provider for data centers find new clients to talk to? So first up, when you have two different kinds of lines of business, we first need to unravel, is it the same kind of client who's going to buy microgrids and renewable energy from your company? Or is it potentially two different clients? Is it potentially two different ideal client profiles, potentially two different kinds of client target account lists? Is it potentially two different sales teams? In most cases, probably the same, but let's first just double check and make sure that we don't need two different kinds of sales teams, two different sections on your website, two different go-to-market playbooks to be able to educate and build trust with two completely different kinds of buyers of microgrids and renewable energy. So we're going to go with the idea that it's a single kind of buyer. So once we know that, to find clients to talk to, we need to make sure that we're talking to them in the realities of the world that we live in today. Because 10 years ago, buyers of these kinds of solutions, which microgrids probably wasn't even a thing back then. I remember going to a data center related conference in about 10 years ago, and there was one CEO talking about their approach to energy and sustainability out of like 50 different topics that are on the site. And most of the people in the room looked at that he had just landed in a spaceship from another planet. It just wasn't a thing. So microgrids, probably not, but a little bit like on energy management and sustainability was a little bit of a thing. PUE's been around for quite some time. So when it comes to finding the right people to talk to, we need to make sure that we're speaking with them in a way that they see us as the go-to experts in the space. Why is it so important that our prospects and clients see your company as experts in microgrids and renewable energy? Because we now live in a world where there's no reason for people to talk with you and your sales team until they're very, very far along in their research and decision-making process. It didn't used to be this way. 10 years ago, they would gladly talk to someone from your sales team after maybe halfway through the buyer's journey. If we're thinking about sports analogies, they would meet with someone from your team during the halftime show, regardless of whether it was basketball or soccer or football. And if it was a baseball game, they'd meet with someone from your halftime team, I don't know, maybe during the fifth inning. We now live in a world where the self-propelled buyer's journey is the dominant buyer's journey for nearly everyone. It used to be that it was the dominant buyer's journey for millennials. Now it's millennials and Gen Z and Gen X, and even a lot of younger boomers who are pushing out retirement and still staying in the workforce. So we need to recognize just how much impact this device and mobile and cloud and social has had on how people research and make decisions. And all these things started with an empowered buyer on the business to consumer side. And it's for sure has filtered down into the business to business side, IT kind of side. Gartner estimates a typical buyer's journey is 83% of the way over before vendor contact. They're 83% of the way done before they're open to talking with someone from your sales teams. So when it comes to finding clients to talk to, the problem is if we only wait to talk to them until they're at the absolute end, someone else, another team, another company, or multiple companies have been the ones doing all of the educating. They've been building all of the trust. They've been steering the whole conversation of how your prospects and clients evaluate, how they compare all the different options when it comes to microgrids and renewable energy. So if we want to make sure that we are able to be in on those early conversations, that we're able to influence how our prospects and clients evaluate the different options in front of them, it is incredibly important. It is mandatory that we figure out a way to get in there early and often, because they're not going to let us in anymore as a transaction-focused salesperson. We need to reposition. We need to reboot. We need a radical makeover so that when our sales team, when our marketing team, when our account managers meet with potential prospects and clients, they are now seen, your team is now seen as the go-to experts in the microgrid and renewable energy industry. They need to be seen as subject matter experts, teachers, trusted advisors, and even the more advanced people on your team to be seen as thought leaders. By showing up like that, by publishing, by creating and promoting, by distributing amazingly helpful educational content, blogs, downloadables, videos, podcasts, live streams like this, webinars, offline webinars in the form of like breakfast seminars and lunch and learns and deep dive educational symposiums and panels, all of these. The goal is for your company to be in as many of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision as possible. By default, most people in the data center industry bet a huge amount of their budget on field marketing and event marketing, which no matter how epic your cabana party is, no matter how fantastic your golf tournament is, those just count as 1 or 2 touch points. So what about the other 26 touch points? How are we going to make sure that we stay with the best prospects and clients throughout the full buyer's journey? So we need to know what they are interested in, and we need to tailor our efforts, customize all of our education and trust building to focus on their biggest goals and their biggest challenges. That's how we make sure that we find the best clients to talk to, and we'll know it's working because by the time we get to those one-on-one conversations, they're already quoting your methodology. They've used all your tools and resources to frame how they evaluate all the other options for microgrids and renewable energy that are in front of them. And because of that, it has a dramatic impact of ensuring that your company is on the short list. And when you do this at a world-class elite level, you'll find in many cases that the short list collapses substantially down to sometimes the point where you're the only company left on that short list by the time they get in market, by the time they get to the decision stage of the journey. In order to have that much of a neutralizing of competition, they're relatively unusual circumstances, but it can, all of this done right, nearly guarantees that you're on the short list, and it for sure knocks out a lot of companies that they would potentially consider who don't show up the way you're showing up. They're showing up as if it's still 10 years ago, and prospects and clients want to have a cold pitch all day long. And that's just not how buyers research and make their purchase decisions anymore. The self-propelled buyer's journey means that no one needs your sales team to read them the information that's on your website anymore. Because if they can't read it, for sure, there's a video on the website where they can press the play button and it will be read to them, or an audio on there, or they just asked Copilot or Chat or Google or Siri, and any one of those personal assistants read them and gave them back the same information. So again, when your client-facing team shows up, they need to show up as a consultant, a teacher, a trusted advisor, or a subject matter expert. With that, we're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsor, and we'll come back with a few more great questions on data center go-to-market sales and marketing.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg again from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you are watching our weekly Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing live Q&A show. If you're getting good value from this live stream, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you do in the data center industry. With that, let's dive into our next question. How does a fiber optic network solutions provider get more new clients? How does a fiber optic network solutions provider get more new clients? That's a great question. And a lot of it has to do with the nature of your business model. What exactly you do for clients that need help with their fiber optic networking. So it's a business model issue, it's a product roadmap issue, it's a solutions issue. And more than likely, to get more new clients, there's two scenarios. One is you're really happy with the kind of clients you have, and you want more clients that are similar to your best clients, or you're brand new or you're just not happy at all with your current clients and you're really starting from scratch and you kind of have an idea of where you want to end up, but there's no real existing case studies page on your website that we can anchor our plans to based on where you've been successful historically. So with that in mind, we need to be way more specific about getting new clients. We need to know what kinds of new clients we actually want to get. And that's where putting together an ideal client profile, an ICP, becomes so vitally important. And the base level ICP, the base level ideal client profile, will define where these clients are located, the geographic region, usually a company size, maybe an industry or a business model. And then there may be some telecommunications specific factors that come up that also define whether they're a good fit or not. Are there certain carriers that those clients should already be utilizing to be a great fit for what you do? Are there certain carriers that if they are using are going to make them a bad fit for what it is that you do? And there may be some other factors such as the size of internal IT resources, number of locations. Those you'll be figuring out over time when you define what clients are most successful with your firm and which are least successful with your firm. And that's how you determine who's qualified, who's totally unqualified, and who's in that murky middle of kind of sort of qualified if everything else lines up. So that will help you document your ideal client profile. From there, you figure out the kinds of people that you want to be building relationships with, educating and building trust with. Those will be your buyer personas to get into more conversations where you can build relationships with the right people. And then from there, you'll also be able to hopefully build a target account list of the kinds of companies that are most likely to fit that ideal client profile where those buyer personas would be working. And usually a target account list is anywhere from a couple dozen to a few hundred, maybe a few thousand companies that would be a perfect fit for working with your company for their fiber optic network solutions needs. So once you have that in mind, you have a company list and you know the kinds of people within the companies, and the kinds of people within the companies, you go and do your buyer persona research so you know the consensus on their biggest goals and challenges for each of those segments. And from those segments, if you think about like the primary buyer persona, maybe it's a CTO, maybe it's an infrastructure manager, chief infrastructure engineer, something like that. You're looking for what their biggest goals are, what their biggest challenges are, and those will help inform what your content and event strategy should look like, the topics that you're going to be creating. In a lot of ways, doing marketing, sales enablement, lead generation, lead nurturing in this era looks a lot like building a media company. So things that you would have traditionally decades ago seen be primarily the domain of like a editor-in-chief of a trade publication or a conference producer or something like that, you for sure also need a content calendar, a topics calendar, an editorial calendar to focus your efforts to make sure you're covering the topics that are top of mind for your most important buyer personas. And by covering, what do we mean? Blogging, email marketing, social media, pillar content pages, downloadable content, long form video, short form video, medium form video, image-based content, and of course, recognizing that the initial lead is really just the beginning in an industry where 28 touch points is kind of the norm in between complete stranger and purchase decision. How do we stay with them for as many as 28 touch points as possible throughout the full buyer's journey? Well, that's where highly targeted, highly segmented email marketing becomes incredibly effective, as well as an events strategy, so that you're hosting really valuable educational webinars and live streams on a regular basis. And depending on the proximity with where your locations are, and depending on the proximity of where your prospects and clients are, you may want to supplement that with an offline version of that, with breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, or similar kinds of educational opportunities, where instead of people watching, being taught by team members, experts from your team virtually, doing the same thing in your training classroom or in your conference room. And if you have the luxury of having your own facility like that, where you already have the space, it can be incredibly inexpensive to do these on a regular basis. And I would just caution you with all of this, the better job you can do with defining who these offline and online events are for, and at what stage of the buyer's journey they are when they're attending this events, the easier it is for you to say, okay, this is the goal. How did I do with my goal? Were most of the people that attended the intended buyer persona? And were they at the intended stage of the buyer's journey, of the life cycle stage with our company, so that we know who they are, where they are, and if we want to be hyper relevant to the conversation that is going on in their mind, not the conversation that we want to be going on in their mind, but the one that actually is going on in their mind, we need to show up in a way that just provides a ton of value to who they are and where they are in their journey. So to get more clients, we need to spend more time with the right people in a way that allows us to add value, educate and build trust, dramatically steer how they set up their criteria that they use to evaluate all the other different options that are in front of them when it comes to fiber optic network solutions. And the better job we do that, the more we stack the decks in our favor, so that by the time they're at the decision stage and they're ready for sales contact, they see us, they see our team as the definitive go-to experts in this space. And wow, does that change the nature of those conversations and gets rid of price sensitivity. They're putting your team on a pedestal. They see your team completely different than just transaction-focused sales professionals of years past. And it used to be 10 years ago that this kind of approach was a nice to have in a world where so many of your prospects are doing all of this self-propelled research on their own before they're willing to have a talk with someone from your sales team. It's gone from a nice to have to pretty much mandated going forward. So think about what you can do so your client-facing team shows up looking more like Big Four consultants. That's providing just incredible amounts of help and expertise throughout the full buyer's journey, so it rivals something that they might go to like PwC or Deloitte or KPMG or EY or something like that for. It should be that next level, that elite, that your prospects and clients want to spend time with members of your team, as opposed to you having to beg for that attention. Next question up is, how can a co-location data center provider improve its lead generation? How can a co-location provider improve its lead generation? I think the first most interesting place to start is I want to clarify two parts of that, because I see two parts of this question being used interchangeably with very different intents. For starters, I see co-location offered by technology-focused companies that want to sell a lot of professional services, managed services along with co-location. And then I see a more commoditized version of co-location that's offered by telecommunications carriers who, yes, they'll sell some professional services, but they're not blurring the line quite as much, with almost encroaching on the territory of what people would have looked at normally as the domain of MSPs, of managed service providers. So let's first talk about whether you're selling a premium kind of co-location that has healthy profit margins, that can afford to have a great consultative sales process wrapped around it where you're educating and building trust, or whether you're selling co-location that's more just a commoditized almost SKU that could be in some scenarios self-purchased. I actually did a podcast interview a couple months back with the CEO of a national data center provider that started really in co-location, but considers themselves probably more heavily involved in managed services. And his take on the whole thing was the days of smile and dial are done. Your salesperson going forward should be able to have conversations with IT executives that really truly add value so they can really understand what that client wants to do and make consultative recommendations. And it wasn't just this interview with, by the way, that was with Ian McClarty from Phoenix Nap. You can find that on our podcast website at dcsmi.com/podcast. Did another interview that's going to be going live in the next couple of weeks with someone that was heading up BDRs, like business development reps from a large data center provider. Very similar kind of sentiment, where the sales team really looks a lot more like fractional CTOs than traditional transaction-focused salespeople. And that interview was Brandon Pecorello. It's been announced, but hasn't gone live yet. Probably by the time you're watching this, it will already be live. And again, you can find that at dcsmi.com/podcast. So the idea is that your sales team in a co-location context should have so much expertise on anything and everything that goes into your data center that that person is strong enough that they could be moonlighting as a fractional CTO nights and weekends for small and medium-sized businesses in the area, really at that kind of level. And that's what completely changes the conversations. Your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your sales team, so they're adding value as opposed to chasing and begging for attention. So that's kind of the co-location provider context, both the co-location business model and how there's been a dramatic shift in upskilling and upping the ante and what a successful sales team looks like in and around co-location. The other side of that is, let's talk about lead generation. Because whenever I host these kinds of events, webinars, live stream conferences, consultations, there are two different ways of using the words lead generation. When you talk to someone that works in sales enablement, sales operations, marketing technology, a lead is a pretty early stage contact. A lead might be someone who registers for a webinar, downloads an ebook or something like that. And it's just you've taken someone that was previously anonymous and they're now a known contact sitting in your CRM. And depending on the nature of whether there's validation on the form and the targeting of the traffic of how they got there and everything like that, you now have a person at a certain company, but you really don't know much else about their behavior with your company and their intent and where they are in the particular buyer's journey. When I talk with salespeople, they usually interchangeably use the term lead and opportunity. An opportunity, when you talk with someone that works in sales enablement or sales ops or marketing technology, an opportunity is pretty late stage. That's a known contact who's done enough, who's demonstrated enough behaviors and intent and interest in your company that they've been passed to the sales team. A human from the sales team is validated that, like, yep, this looks like a good account. I had at least a quick conversation with this person. They're for sure in market for what it is that we do. And even after like a single conversation, I can come up with at least a rough guesstimate of a forecasted close date and a forecasted deal size. That is an opportunity. What happens all too often in co-location among relatively unsophisticated go-to-market teams that don't have a lot of these big resources internally is there starts to be problems among internal team members because these two different concepts, an early stage lead and a late stage sales opportunity, is being used interchangeably. So if you want to make sure that your sales and marketing folks actually get along with each other and have healthy respect and collaboration with each other, first make sure that they're speaking the same terminology, using these terms correctly as opposed to incorrectly. And it'll create a much healthier working environment and stave off a lot of resentment and potential friction down the road. So for a co-location provider, given that context of the two different kinds of co-location, the old school versus the new, more CTO-like sales professional, and the differing views of lead generation, what do we do to put all of that together? Well, what that means is we need to take the really highly educated IT salespeople in these co-location companies, and we need to help them reposition and have a makeover so they're heavily involved in your company's thought leadership and education delivery, content, events, type of strategy and approach. So by the time their prospects are ready for actually a one-on-one sales conversation, the know, like, and trust has already dramatically been built up. So in many ways, your sales team needs to be prepared to come in much earlier on in the buyer's journey than they ever have previously in their careers, so that they show up as a consultant, a teacher, a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert, and perhaps even a thought leader. And conversely, your marketing team members need to be prepared to help support that all the way, that particular scenario all the way very deep into the buyer's journey, so that you make sure in those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision that you and your team are showing up as early and as often as possible to really knock it out of the park with early stage lead generation, middle stage lead generation, and late stage lead generation, which we call a sales opportunity. So you have awareness stage, consideration stage in the middle of the funnel, the middle of the journey, and decision stage. So we really need to make sure to go next level with improving your lead generation, that we get aligned on the nature of your co-location business model, the role of what your sales team and your client-facing team members needs to look like going forward. No one needs them to read the website to them anymore. They need to operate at a much, much higher level. And how do we do lead generation, intentional lead generation throughout the full buyer's journey, not just early, not just late, but several times throughout, and as many of those 28 touch points as possible. So we stay with those prospects and clients throughout the full buyer's journey and are seen as the definitive go-to experts on anything and everything having to do with co-location. So we have one final question that I'm going to be addressing today as we head down the home stretch. Final question is, how does a data center power solutions provider create more awareness? So how does a company that's principally in the business of providing power solutions to data centers create more awareness? So the first question is, who are we creating this awareness for? Do we know the kind of company that we need to be creating this awareness for? Do we have an ideal client profile documented so we know where they're located, the company's size, maybe some business model or industry characteristics? Within those companies, have we identified who the most important and second most important groups of stakeholders are that we need to be building awareness with? You really, to have this awareness creation discussion exercise strategy, we need to know how the company targeting is defined, and we need to know within those companies who the most important buyer personas are that we want to build awareness with. Once we have that figured out, then we can set about looking at the primary and the secondary buyer persona, what each of their biggest goals and challenges are, and we go about creating educational content, educational events, and resources that allow us to get in as early as possible to build great relationships with these kinds of stakeholders, so they see our company as the definitive go-to experts in the industry on anything and everything having to do with power solutions for data centers. And again, the nature of what's in these buyer personas is going to vary depending on how you define the kinds of companies and the kinds of stakeholders that you're targeting. And that usually comes from looking at your existing product solutions, services capabilities, and the kind of clients you've historically done best with, which usually shows up in the case studies page on your website. When you put all of that together, it becomes much easier to create awareness in a way that, by default, most companies are on LinkedIn especially, and to a certain degree on their websites, are doing awareness wrong. They're doing awareness as if every person that they come across is immediately ready to speak to a salesperson because they're going to buy today. The reality is 80 to 90% of your addressable market is not ready to buy today. They could be a fantastic fit to talk with your team, to talk with your sales team, to be up on the deal board, to have a forecasted close date and a forecasted deal size at some point in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But if you try prematurely to accelerate that, it's the same kind of crappy experience of going to buy a car and feeling like the salesperson in the car dealership wants to high pressure you into buying today, even though you told them that you have 9 months left on your lease. So we need to make sure that we understand not only who they are, but where they are in the journey. And we need to make sure that we've made the investments in a way that allows us to stay with those buyers throughout the full buyer's journey. Because if we wait till they're ready for sales contact, they're already 83% of the way through their decision-making process. That's what Gartner found. The research comparing options and evaluating pricing, typically 83% of that happens before vendor contact, before they talk to anyone from a sales team about anything having to do with IT or data centers or power solutions. So how do we make sure that we show up early and often in that first 83%? Because by default, if we just do it the way that most companies are doing it, we're only going to be there in the final 17% if we're there at all. And if you're just sharing your brochures, if you're just sharing PDFs of your products and services, of what you do with power solutions on LinkedIn and on your website, you're probably completely missing out on the opportunity to spend that first 83% with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that they see you and your company as the go-to experts. And when it comes to creating awareness, we don't want to just create awareness that your products exist. It's incredibly important that we create awareness of the deep expertise that is within your company. It's the only thing that's going to get you out of the business of being a commodity provider. It's the only thing that's going to assure your relevance going forward. Is your client-facing team needs to show up as the definitive subject matter experts, teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, thought leaders on anything and everything having to do with power solutions in and around the data center industry. So that is the most important consideration to think about, and some related sub-considerations related to some tactical and strategy to be thinking about for a company that provides power solutions in and around data centers and wants to create more awareness. So that was the final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. If you want to make sure that you stay up to date on the most current upcoming events like this, as well as similar educational resources, make sure that you subscribe to our weekly email newsletter, the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes out every Sunday to your email inbox. And you can subscribe. You can sign up for that directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. We wish you great success in growing and capitalizing on the enormous opportunities that exist in the data center industry, regardless of whether you look at the $1 trillion that NVIDIA's Jensen Huang says is going to be spent upgrading data centers over the next 4 years, of the 100-fold increase in demand that Michael Dell predicts is going to happen in and around the data center space over the next 10 years. It is a phenomenal time to be working in digital infrastructure, mission-critical facilities, and data centers. We know there's power issues that need to be addressed. We know these are all going to be addressed in time, but yeah, it's a great place to be. But it's super important to make sure that you're showing up in a way that allows you to build great, meaningful relationships with your prospects and clients. So I would really take to heart the recurring themes that we kept coming back to in this week's live stream. If you have any questions, feel free to post those in the comments, and we look forward to seeing you back again next week. Till next time, I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. Take care now and enjoy the rest of your day. Have a fantastic week.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.
Welcome to the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg. In this podcast, we explore the data center landscape with expert insights tailored for CEOs, sales professionals, marketers, customer success managers, CSMs, product managers, PMs, and channel partner managers, from achieving sales targets to fostering team development and innovation, nurturing customer relationships, and optimizing go-to-market GTM strategies. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast equips you with actionable strategies for success in the AI data center industry. Our primary audience includes go-to-market professionals who work in and around AI data centers, including co-location, wholesale, hyperscale, edge, and modular, as well as technology, facilities, construction, real estate, sales, and marketing companies. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, this podcast is for you. Sponsored by DCSMI, we're here to elevate the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay up to date about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at dcsmi.com. You can also subscribe to and follow the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast on your favorite podcast player, app, or social media platform, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Stay tuned as we dive into thought-provoking discussions, answer burning questions, and explore the future of data center go-to-market. Let's get started.